Welcome everybody to this week's Frax Check, your weekly Frax vibe check. I'm here with my co-host DeFi Dave and our producer extraordinaire Samuel, right here live with us. And today we're going to talk about the Frax on-chain data at first. Then I'm going to hand it over to these two boys to talk over their favorite tweets and moments for Frax this week. So now let's dive into the data. I want to first talk about the peg, right? And this whole week, Frax has pretty much been holding at $1.99, $1.99. And to double check that, let's go into the markets. And you see here, for a $100 million Frax swap into USDC, you see the exchange rate is 0.9991. Peg check, okay. Now let's do the collateral ratio check. Down here, you see this at a 90.5% collateral ratio, meaning every single Frax is backed by 90 cents of it is backed by all the AMOs. And that's kind of on the right here, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. This here I want to highlight is the decentralization ratio, meaning how much of the collateral ratio is actually fully decentralized. And we see here it's been climbing up steadily over time, right there. Now, moving forward to the Frax BP.
Kid, I have a question for you about the peg. So when people go to CoinGecko, they actually see that the price deviates a lot. And then there's a lot of questions that are always asked inside of the Frax chat on Telegram saying like, oh, hey, the Frax, I saw the Frax was at like 98 cents today. Like, is that actually the case? Like, why is Gecko getting all of this data saying that Frax isn't holding the peg?
I think CoinGecko pulls a index price across the board. And even when the Frax price ever gets down to that point, arbors are coming in and taking that away immediately. And as you can clearly see, and this is factual, when you try to swap $100 million of Frax, you're going to get a 0.9991 exchange rate. So CoinGecko is like a cheap and dirty way of doing it. I very much prefer going to Curve and just really pulling it here.
Yeah.
To really
the problem,
maybe that's something. Yeah. Maybe that's something to ask Bobby if Bobby ever comes on.
Yeah. Yeah. So CoinGecko is not pulling the price from Curve. On Curve,
no, they are pulling the price from Curve. It's just they're pulling it from a variety of sources, and with data APIs and pulling, there's things lost in translation that aren't always accurate.
But the base pool itself is never getting to 98 cents, right? So, or like the Frax 3 pool is never getting to 98 cents. It's some other random pools that are creating some pricing inefficiencies.
Correct. And if it does ever hit that 98 cents, people can actually come to the Frax website and actually redeem. So, but that has never happened because that's
never will.
Yeah. So, thank you, Sam, for the question. And then we're going to dive over to our favorite base pool, or based pool, as Dave likes to say. And you can see here that we are currently at around $8.1 million across all the base meta pools, meaning these are the projects that are plugging into the Frax base pool. You can see the graphical representation here. And as you can see, the very high up is SUSD, ALUSD, and LUSD, right? I really like these because these are decentralized stable coins pairing against the Frax base pool. Now, if you want to take a look at the Frax base pool as a whole, we see here that it's currently at about 600 million across the board between USDC and Frax, holding strong, holding very, very strong. If you look at the 3 pool over here, it's at about, let's call it $1 billion. So the Frax base pool is already 60% of the way through to catching up with the 3 pool. Pretty good stats for me. Pretty good for me.
Wait, so does that mean
60%?
Does that mean that all of Frax's liquidity that it provides into the 3 pool has been moved over to base pool?
No, great question. So the Frax 3 pool, which is actually down here, you see that it's still looking at about $1 billion plus. So that liquidity hasn't even really been moved over yet.
Wow, that's incredible that Frax base pool has been able to acquire so much liquidity without Frax providing its own liquidity into it. It's incredible.
That's what I'm saying. Like that growth, one would have expected cannibalization between the two pools, but no, they're both going super strong. So loving it so far. Now let's take a look at.
So with the Frax base pool, does Frax have a like? I assume Frax has like a curve AMO for the base pool, and
Yeah.
that's how it's growing. And like, there's been no like transferring over 3-pool liquidity into the 2-pool. It's all just been native to like base pool growth.
I think so. We're gonna dive into the AMOs in my profitability tab right here. But let me just wrap with just a snapshot of what's going on with Frax as a whole. So currently there are 1.4 billion Frax circulating FRAX, and the current price, or rather the current market cap of FXS is 531 million. Okay. And as you can see earlier, the majority of this 1.4 billion of FRAX is in the base pool as well as the Frax 3 pool. Okay, so all the Frax stablecoins out there are actively providing liquidity to the market. So let's take a look at the profits now. Granted, we know that after the base pool, Frax has stopped selling CRV and CVX, and we see that as a very marked difference in the profitability of Frax, right? There's kind of a drop off here, and it was expected because Frax has now switched from the profitability phase of proving out the AMOs to a growth stage with the Frax base pool. So all of this is like growth and marketing, and think of it in that sense instead. But I'm not going to stop there. I love digging deeper. So I managed to pull this graph from our boy, shout out to Seba, who's on our very first episode,
Seba.
the Dune Wizard. Make sure you go there and check him out as well. But here you see for the month of August, Frax so far has farmed $1.3 million in CRV right there on the month total in the purple. Then in CVX, Frax has farmed $492,000. Okay. Now, the only difference here in August is that Frax didn't sell the CRV. Instead, they're plowing it back into the ecosystem and vote locking them.
And vote locking them and as a CVX CRV.
Correct.
Yeah.
I'm not sure on what percent is split between the vote escrow lock and CVX CRV, but I'll be sure to pull that for next week.
I think it's yeah. They said like up to 95% can be the ratio.
Can you go back up to the top chart?
Yeah.
Yes.
So the spent FXS is what's being used for Vodium pitch and Vodium reclaims, right? So
Correct.
So we're spending less on bribes now, spending a lot less on bribes, and
Yes, relative.
yes, relative. So but even if you look at the non-relative, right? So just pure FXS, it's actually gone down a lot, and so it's the price as well too. So that's a good sign. I mean, if we're still increasing, if the amount of like Frax in the ecosystem is still increasing and bribes are decreasing, that's a really good outcome. And I think that's something that the community talked about for a while and has been implemented now, and we're seeing good results from it.
Yeah, agreed. That means liquidity is getting cheaper for Frax, right? And people are becoming more trustworthy and actually to LP into the Frax pools, and more importantly, to vote for the Frax pool. But you see here, our Vodium spending in August is already at 2.1 mil. So we're definitely in that growth stage, because 2.1 million Vodium bribes minus the theoretical 1.3 mil from the CRV farm, and then minus the another 500K here, we're still like net down like maybe about like 400 or 500K. But like I said, now we're in the growth phase, so this is expected.
Right. Okay. Is there a net chart here that shows?
There isn't, but I will ask Seba to incorporate that for us for next week's Frax check.
Yeah, that'll be really nice.
Great suggestions.
Yeah, that'll be really nice to see like net, like where we're at for how much we're spending in frac shares versus how much we're pulling in on the farming.
Yeah, I agree. I'll talk to Seba about that. But then he also built this beautiful dashboard here to keep us all accountable. And nobody likes to talk about expenses, but Seba made a chart for it, even better.
Seba does.
So you kind of see here, like we're spending, ever since July, pretty much spent 93,000 fracs. FXS, I believe this is what it's called, or rather what it is instead of FXS. I need to ask Seba to clarify. And then he also shows how the team investor and advisors are kind of getting their outflow. And then you see more so here as well.
Wait, can you go back up to the expenses? So of that 93,000, like that's is it all farming, or is it where are those expenses going to?
Let's take a look.
Or is that the recurring? So 93,000. It's 93,000 FXS, right? So that's like $700K a month.
Yeah. So every. Yeah. I think you're right about that.
Maybe that is the farming. That's.
So I think on the frac staking it's 88.5K FXS per week.
Right.
I think is what's on the gauges. So I don't think that's being factored in here. So I need to ask.
And so what about the what about the Frax community and Treasury FXS balance? Like, is that just expected to go to zero at some point, or is there is that expected to kind of bottom out at maybe like 10 or 20 million?
I think there is. Well, the daily emission gauges is coming from the Frax community and Treasury FXS balances. So I think there's going to be a spend to zero there. However, I would imagine because Frax is kind of farming some of its FXS back and there's a lot of that kind of loop, I think it should be evergreen, should be sustainable.
Yeah.
I'll double check again with Seba to see if we can model that out and see what it looks like at the rate at which we're continuing.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably good for like a future episode to talk about this, about like, how do we maintain treasury balance into the long term and provide rewards. I'm sure it's already been discussed in the forums and stuff, but maybe when we have either like Sam or Drake or one of the other core guys on, they can go into this a bit more.
Yeah. Well, I think what's going to add some light here is the AMO's holdings, right? At the end of the day, these are the assets in the treasury. So thank you, Sam. That was a perfect segue. As you kind of look here, the majority of the investor AMO consists of VLCVX. And to be exact, we have like 22.5 mil of VLCVX. The second largest holding is ETH, which is quite awesome, right? Is at 2.7 million.
It's a lot of ETH.
And then, exactly. So 2.7
million. Wait, $2.7 million
of
of
dollars.
Oh, okay.
Of dollars.
I was like,
dollars. Bro. That's
So that's a lot of ETH.
You're talking about Frax
That's a
ETH.
lot of
You're
ETH.
talking about Frax ETH. Future number.
Oh,
So it's about
So that's
1,300 ETH,
and like,
roughly.
Yeah. That's like about these two together is 25 mil. So they make up the majority of this AMO. And on the liquidity AMO, this is where kind of Frax provides liquidity on Uniswap, Tokamak, as you can kind of see here, or even FraxSwap. Our native FraxSwap currently already has about 35 million in there as well, which is kind of wild. Then the infamous Curve AMO. Here we see that the majority, I would say maybe 75%, give or take, that is $817 million in the Curve AMO. Wow. And just to clarify, this specific Convex AMO rather has the Frax, USDC, USDT, DAI, and a handful of other stable coins as well. So it's not just, $816 million worth of USDC. It's kind of a blend of all the stables in Frax's Convex holdings and LPs. And on the lending side, we see here that we've lent out about 19 million of Frax, and we've accrued 4.8 million of Frax over kind of like the lifetime of this lending AMO. Pretty damn profitable. I would say the second most profitable AMO from these four are like the lending AMOs. It's just it doesn't scale as well because it requires the demand of, well, the market to demand to borrow Frax, right? And that's what we're working on with Frax Lend. So that's I can see why Frax is very motivated to get Frax Lend more adoption, because lending is actually one of the more profitable AMOs. And especially with us not selling Curve and Convex or CVX and CRV anymore, we really need some other source of profitability and revenue. As well.
Oh, go ahead.
I see the sources. I see the future sources of revenue coming from lending, Frax ETH, and then potentially options. If Frax looks into like options writing more, like an options writing AMO would be really interesting.
Yep.
I think the lending, it's interesting that like the lending is dollar for dollar the most profitable, but at the same time we've limited it to 20 million. And I'm guessing that's because of the third party protocol risk, right? So like when you're putting money into these lending platforms, like it's direct risk. Like they get hacked, which they have. And then that.
It's not mention names.
We're not going to mention names, but like many lending platforms have gotten hacked before, and like when that Frax goes out, I mean it's gone. I mean you're essentially taking a hit on the balance sheet. So, like essentially the only way to scale up the lending will be through Frax Lend, coming soon. Yeah,
correct. And plus we'll have more control over the underwriting there, right? So. I think it's best to kind of in-house some of this stuff. If it especially becomes a core economic engine for Frax, I very much prefer to have it in-house and we have full control over it instead of using third-party platforms like Sam said.
Yeah.
Well,
it's the DeFi Trinity.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, this has been my portion of the Frax Check, your weekly Frax vibe check, where we dove into the on-chain data. I thank you for my co-host's feedback. I will add it to next week's Frax Check, and I'll be sure to tune in next week to see how far we've grown.
Thanks for that. Thanks for the data. Thanks for the Frax Check, a very much needed objective vibe check. And we're gonna bring it over to the tweets of the week. I picked my 3 favorite tweets that I think are notable and relevant. So the first one is from the man himself, Sam Kazemian. This is some commentary about Frax FUD around the USDC because of the whole tornado blacklist of their smart contracts. And the tweet goes like this: saying FraxDAI has USDC blacklist risk is missing the point. OFAC can sanction any smart contract DAO entity protocol thing and make it illegal to use, own, help maintain, like it does drugs, WMDs, and Tornado. It also applies to LUSD, RAI, or your favorite other dApps and stablecoins. I feel like Frax gets picked on the most when it comes to like the USDC can't they just like blacklist the contracts, this and that. Like, well, they can blacklist any dApp, any smart contract. Like Frax is not immune to it. I don't know. What are your guys' thoughts on it?
Okay, can I tell another story about this before we talk about this one? So like Sam is like Batman, right? So he's like off in his cave, like working on Frax for all times of the day, right? Like late into the night. But if you're in Telegram or you're on Twitter and you just mention something about like, oh, USDC is gonna make like Frax super weak, or like, Frax is breaking the peg, da, da, da. He like appears out of nowhere in like random Telegram chats or like random Twitter threads, and just goes on these like epic threads explaining like why the person said, or like what the person said was wrong. So like this, I'm in another group called Lobster DAO, and like Sam jumped into Lobster DAO and just like went on like I don't know, it must have been like 100 message write up about Frax and risks and like about LUSD and stuff. And one of the things he mentioned about LUSD was that it's non-upgradable. So if it was, so something like LUSD, people have been saying like, this is a place it's the best stable in case of OFAC sanctions. Sam was saying like if they sanctioned it, Chainlink would probably have to stop providing its services to LUSD, and then it would just brick, and it wouldn't work anymore, and everybody's money would be stuck, and there'd be no way to get your money out. So, and the contract is non-upgradable as well too. So, like I think this week's OFAC sanctions have been an eye-opening about like how decentralized your product actually is, because Tornado is, and it's still working. If you are not American, if you're not American and you're outside the U.S., I mean, you can still use it. Probably shouldn't, because you may get blacklisted to your exchange. But if you're in places where it just makes sense to use it, then you should. Or I'm not sorry. Let me take that back.
It's
not that
interesting
you should, but
how
you
they
should,
blacklisted.
Consult an attorney first before using Tornado.
Yeah. It's interesting how they blacklisted a protocol, because they put it on a sanction list for persons. Does that mean smart contracts are legalized, recognized, legal recognized persons? Does it mean, we always talk, I like to talk about how protocols are sovereign entities, and the government sanctioning a protocol, it kind of plays to that as well. So, this kind of by the government sanctioning Tornado Cash, it kind of brings recognitions to
and
smart
I think if you look at Frax,
does that make
Frax
sense?
is, even if they sanction all the Frax contracts, right? The majority of liquidity for Frax exists outside of the actual Frax contracts. If that actually happened, people would be going to Curve to sell their Frax into the market. They wouldn't be coming back to the Frax contract to unmint or take the Frax out. Even if USDC blacklisted the Frax contract and mint and bricked all the USDC that's in there, there's still all the other pools, right? You could just go to the Curve pool. I mean, it has 60% of all the liquidity for Frax. So the risk there is
And that leads to my next tweet. Is this my boy VE Horny, who's one of my favorite Twitter accounts. He's always standing up for Frax on Twitter and in the chats. You see kind of this whole exchange between Alunara and VE Horny and Yeti Wap. And here's in the next side of this is okay, it's one thing for USDC to blacklist Frax itself as a protocol, but then the other argument is that people try to put against Frax is once Frax holds all this USDC, once they freeze the USDC, that's not how it works. That's not how Frax works. The USDC is in smart contracts. It's in Curve smart contracts. It's in Uniswap smart contracts. So Circle would have to blacklist Uniswap itself, the Uniswap smart contract itself, the Curve smart contract itself, where the USDC actually is. Not Frax doesn't actually hold the USDC. In this exchange, it's basically VE Horny standing up for Frax, and my favorites at the end is nope, exactly why the design is brilliant. The only way for Circle to fuck Frax is to kill USDC. It's kind of everybody has a gun to their head, and Circle will destroy their whole business if they kill Frax. Basically, they're that intertwined.
Yeah.
What do you guys think?
Can you on the Frax page? Isn't there a chart of how much money is actually in the treasury versus in smart contracts? In AMO, how much money is actually redeemable that's not in AMOs? I guess the question. Maybe we can put this into the Frax check for next week, because this is a big question. If they brick the Frax contracts, how much USDC and Frax would be outside of that and still be redeemable if they bricked it?
I don't know.
That is good. We should maybe ask Seba to make another dashboard for us, Frax Risk Protocol. But I'm pretty sure it's on the Frax website, so we'll come back to it next week.
Yeah, and moving off the whole tornado episode, USDC episode and stuff. Something that I find really exciting is all the real yield action happening on Arbitrum. We're going to have Mr. Real Yield himself, DeFi Alpha, on the podcast tomorrow. And this is this guy, he's like a truffle pig, 0xD24. Like, you know how like there's pigs that like sniff for truffles and can like find it and find like the gold? Like, I swear, like this dude like makes threads and they're like prophetic. Like, he basically like mapped out all of Fraxland before Fraxland came out, to the point where we were like going over Fraxland on the podcast, like his thread live with Drake himself. And he has another great thread about Tracer becoming mycelium, and you know the whole, how like Umami can build strategies on top of it. And since like there's FXS and Frax in the MLP pool, which is the equivalent to the GLP pool of GMX, he's speculating. I bet the Frax team is already discussing ways they can deploy POL and new AMOs to the MLP pool and skew farming vaults once live. That would be like a great thing in the future to see. Like, I know the Frax core team wants to be much more cautious with like AMOs and protocol own liquidity, just because of like everything that's happened. But I think the Mycelium team has, they've been around for a while. Like, their contracts are audited, they're trusted, they know what they're doing. It's not just like some random, thing that flipped up. But it is good to be cautious. It's good, but it's good to think like this in the future and be creative like this in the future, because in order for Frax to succeed, it needs to make these efforts on other rollups and other chains, and become the stablecoin of these rollups. So in the same way that Tether is the stablecoin of centralized exchanges, USDC is the stablecoin for layer 1 Ethereum. We want Frax to be like the de facto stablecoin of rollups, and like attack, and like it's only like 1 billion TVL on Arbitrum, and there's all this action happening. And if we can just get put Frax in the right position with the right protocols, and you'll have circulation skyrocket on these rollups, because right now it's at 1 billion. Like, imagine like once it gets to what Ethereum level TVL right now, and Frax is a majority of TVL of that. Like, that's super promising. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I mean, I'm still looking into this like GMX GLP thing. It's definitely seems like it's going to be big. We're really at the beginning. I mean, our chat with Umami yesterday was really insightful. I need to go back and I'm listening to it now on the editing board, but I'm definitely going to have to put some funds into practice. It looks like that whole ecosystem over there is pretty awesome.
Agreed.
Yeah, I'm excited for it. But yep, that's my my tweets of the week.
Perfect.
And that is the first Frax check. We've been checked. The first Frax check. Frax vibe check of the week. I love that name. I love how we like want to like turn everything. Oh, let's change it to Frax. Like, let's name this Frax cast. And at the last minute, we're like, wait, this is a better name. But yeah, thanks for everyone. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe. At Flywheel. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter and on Telegram at Flywheel Pod. You can follow me on Twitter at DeFi Dave.
You can follow me at 0x_K.
I'm at traders_insight.
And we'll see you next time.